B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, February 7th, 2017. Despite a united front by Democrats and a 24-hour speak-a-thon on the Senate floor, notch another victory for Trump, as Betsy DeVos, accurately described by Chuck Schumer as the worst cabinet nominee in recent history, was nevertheless confirmed by a vote of 51 to 50. Now, there are only 100 members of the Senate. The 51st vote came from Mike Pence, the vice president, and this is the first time, I believe, in American history that a cabinet nominee has required a tiebreaker vote from the vice president. So I think that it was a sincere effort by Democrats to block her confirmation. She is a billionaire, partly due to the Amway fortune, partly due to her own family, and she's way out of touch with our public education system and the needs of its students. In addition, she is an advocate for charter schools, which I don't believe to be pure and unvarnished evil. But the way charter schools are played off against the funding for public schools, it is a lose-lose proposition. And in my 8-minute, that's all I could stand listening to Rush Limbaugh this morning, he was crowing about this confirmation and lecturing liberals because they have ruined the public education system because of their loyalty to the teachers' unions. That's the way he breaks it out. But the real issues here, I don't think, are going to be addressed by a woman who is determined to dismantle the Federal Department of Education. And while I do think that it was a good thing that Democrats rallied to oppose her, and in a rare show of unity in the Democratic caucus, all 48 Democrats voted against her. Now, will they be able to hold this same group together for a vote against Scott Pruitt to run the EPA or Jeff Sessions to run the Justice Department? I doubt it. And the ultimate test, at least long term, the most significant issue here is, will they rally to block the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch to the United States Supreme Court? And I am dubious. I'm sorry, but the Democratic caucus is too fractured. There are already people who've said they're willing to vote for Gorsuch even before the hearings are conducted, and it's not promising. The Democrats do not play defense as well as the Republicans, and I am sorry to make that observation. I'd love to be here cheerleading and saying, wow, it was great. You know, people used the power to lobby members of Congress. Democrats were lobbying Republicans, and the activism that we've seen, I think, is beautiful. But do we have the leadership in Washington, in the House, and in the Senate to really confront the menace that we face? And I'm sorry to say, so far, I haven't seen it. How about some good news? We are told reliably that tomorrow, Don Siegelman, the former Democratic governor of Alabama, will be released from the Oakdale prison in Louisiana, where he has been serving the term for being railroaded there by Karl Rove and Karl's buddies. We've covered this case for years now. As you know, I believe Don Siegelman has been a political prisoner. I am aghast that Barack Obama did not provide him with relief through commutation or pardon, even in his final round of commutations. And Don Siegelman may not be able to talk to us for as long as 6 months from tomorrow. He will be released to complete his term at a halfway house, and typically there are restrictions on their movements and media access in the case of a guy like Siegelman. So I will be trying to line up an interview as soon as he is permitted to do so. And I am delighted for Don and his family that this dark, dark era for Siegelman is starting to come to a close. Well, as we reported yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu flew back to Israel yesterday so that he could vote in a manner that is clearly unconstitutional. This is the bill in the Knesset that will retroactively legalize the illegal Jewish settlements on privately owned Palestinian land. This is a real red flag. It is a provocation by Israel, and they believe that they have this moment where the United States will not object because Trump and Netanyahu believe that they are cozy, and we have little to dispute that so far. And this is not in Israel's best interest. That is my deeply held opinion, because it will only cause a new round of conflict with the Palestinians, and it will not lead to peace. And Israel plays itself as a victim. But any attacks on settlements in the West Bank cannot be construed as just pure terrorism or unexplained violence. Palestinians have been treated so badly for so long. And this is the ultimate test in many respects. Israel is trying to concoct a false reality that these settlements are legitimate because they say the Old Testament tells them that. And this is a real dark day for the state of Israel. I'm a sharp critic of the Zionist governments of the state of Israel and their apologists here in the United States, led by AIPAC and members of both political parties. But I support the right of the state of Israel to exist, and I support efforts to construct some sort of peaceful arrangement with the Palestinians. But this is not an effort that leads in that direction in any way whatsoever. The vote in the Knesset was 60 to 52, and it retroactively legalized several thousand housing units in 16 settlements on about 2,000 acres of Palestinian-owned land. Now, the law provides for compensation to Palestinian landowners, but Saeb Erekat, the Palestinian chief negotiator, said looting is illegal. The Israeli settlement enterprise negates peace and the possibility of a two-state solution. And it'll be interesting to see. Trump and Netanyahu are meeting next week, a week from tomorrow, in Washington. And will Trump criticize Israel for this move? Or will he embrace it and put the United States squarely on the wrong side of this matter in a way that could make us a target, not only for the Palestinians, but from others for a long time to come? There has been some recent flare-up of violence. There was a single rocket fired from the Gaza Strip near Ashkelon in southern Israel. It landed with a thud, but didn't cause any property damage or any damage to humans, no injuries or fatalities. And Israel has responded by pounding Hamas targets from land and air in the Gaza Strip. And while these things do occur, and I, of course, do not in any way condone the use of these rockets that are fired from Gaza into Israel, but the disproportionate response by Israel is something we can count on, not only militarily, but also rhetorically. And so we get this guy, Naftali Bennett, who is the far-right member, the education minister in the Netanyahu cabinet, and a man who Netanyahu desperately needs to complete his coalition to govern, and because Netanyahu is under fire in a corruption investigation. So Bennett is predicting a new war with the Palestinians. He says, today we are still being threatened by Gaza. They are still trying to hurt us. The threats are increasing from Lebanon to Gaza. A next round of fighting is a question of when, not if. And this time we must be decisive and win, not end it in a draw, so as not to have another round after that. So is he really talking about extermination? I have to leave that question without an answer because I don't know. But it's troubling that the question even arises. Amnesty International has reported that they now have solid evidence that over the last 5 years, the Assad government in Syria has been hanging people in a jail secretly on a weekly basis. Now, this has grisly and eerie comparisons to the way Barack Obama had a Tuesday video conference to decide who was the next target of Americans' drone air force, the next targeted assassination. Well, on Tuesdays in Damascus, at a specific prison called Saydnaya, Saydnaya, thousands of people have been held there over the last 5 years, and the estimated range is 5,000 to 13,000 people who have been hanged. And there is this grisly process every Tuesday. 20 to 50 people were hanged after sham trials before a military court. Then their deaths were listed as respiratory disorder or heart failure. They were buried on military land south of Damascus. And again, the estimate is as many as 13,000 people may have been killed in this manner. The report also indicates that the rebels in Syria carried out serious human rights abuses, but it said the vast majority of detention-related violations since 2011 have been carried out by Syrian authorities. Well, today is a day that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here in San Francisco will hold a hearing regarding Donald Trump's executive decree banning travel. And the hearing is set for 3 p.m. Pacific time. That's a little over an hour from now as I'm speaking to you. So we'll have the results, if they are reported, tomorrow. I think many media outlets assume that the court is going to just snap its fingers and immediately issue a stay or lift the stay that was put on by the Seattle judge Robart. But my guess is that with these oral arguments, each side gets a half an hour, and it's being done by teleconference, rare. But apparently they couldn't get the parties into the courtroom here in San Francisco, so they're using the phone. And it will be live streamed, although there's no video that will be permitted of the court proceedings. My guess is that it will be a day or two, but we'll see. Courts can move as fast as courts wish to move. And typically it's not very fast, but certainly this is a very critical situation that does call for immediate action. So there are basically 3 arguments that the court is going to be hearing. One will be the rulings that have already been laid out and the arguments that were raised there. I consider this to be a very arbitrary and improperly announced. The timing of it was just brutal and unnecessary. So the Robart ruling will be a key part of it. And then there are briefs filed by former diplomats, and they're offering a second argument. We view the order as one that ultimately undermines the national security of the United States rather than making us safer. In our professional opinion, this order cannot be justified on national security or foreign policy grounds. So they're going directly to the rationality of Trump's argument that nobody can question him on national security. If he says we've got to be afraid, we've all got to be afraid. And the courts are having a hard time with this. Robart in particular said that while he respects the authority of the executive branch, that the lack of a rational basis for the ban that is being imposed is a credible, critical, and it's a litigible issue. Is litigible a word, or did I just make that up? The third angle of the legal battle is coming from the now over 100 companies, including Apple, Facebook, and Google, who are arguing that it harms the competitiveness of U.S. companies and that the instability and uncertainty created by the order will make it far more difficult and expensive for U.S. companies to hire some of the world's best talent and impede them from competing in the global marketplace. So we have legal arguments, we have security arguments, and we have economic arguments. How will the Ninth Circuit, the formerly uber-liberal Ninth Circuit, rule on this? Well, that remains to be seen. I want to commend the Baltimore Sun, the Baltimore Sun newspaper, for publishing a very strong op-ed by Chris Edelson, who is an assistant professor for government at American University School of Public Affairs. And the op-ed is entitled, "Ordinary Americans Carried Out Inhumane Acts for Trump." And let me read the opening paragraph. A week ago, men and women went to work at airports around the United States as they always do. They showered, got dressed, ate breakfast, maybe dropped off their kids at school. Then they reported to their jobs as federal government employees, where, according to news reports, one of them handcuffed a 5-year-old child, separated him from his mother, and detained him alone for several hours at Dulles Airport outside Washington. At least one other federal employee at Dulles reportedly detained a woman who was traveling with her 2 children, both U.S. citizens. She was detained for 20 hours without food. A relative says the mother was handcuffed even when she went to the bathroom and threatened with deportation to Somalia. At Kennedy Airport, still other federal employees detained and handcuffed a 65-year-old woman traveling from Qatar to visit her son, who's a U.S. citizen and a serviceman stationed at Fort Bragg. The woman was held for more than 33 hours, according to the New York Times, and denied use of a wheelchair. These are ordinary Americans, and it showed that they were willing to carry out extreme orders from an authoritarian figure who is installed as the President of the United States. And I'm really glad that the professor raised this issue, because it's really unseemly, un-American, and unsettling to imagine that because you get $15 or $20 an hour to grope people at the airport, when you're given an order, that you just carry it out without challenging it or questioning it. And as we see Trump try to exercise even broader power by decree, trying to bypass the courts and the Congress wherever he can, we know that there are many Americans who, like good Nazis, are willing to carry out extreme orders, even those that border on the unconstitutional, the illegal, and the immoral. And to do so in a manner like handcuffing a woman for 20 hours? It's just so hard to take. It really is. Now, Donald Trump started a new firestorm about truthiness and alternative facts yesterday. He made a stop at the Air Force Base in Florida, what was it, MacDill? And he told a group of soldiers there that the news media is playing down the terrorist threat posed by the Islamic State. They're doing it on purpose, and they have their reasons. So, when challenged, the White House scrambled to release a list of 78 attacks going back to September of 2014 that they say were carried out or inspired by the Islamic State. And the White House said that most have not received the media attention they deserved. You know, these obscure events like the terror attacks in Paris and Brussels, the events in San Bernardino, California, and Orlando. Yes, the White House actually said that the media didn't provide adequate coverage. Now, that may be the case in the April 2015 event in Zvornik, Bosnia. That's one that I don't recall. But here's a statement from the White House. Radical Islamic terrorists are determined to strike our homeland as they did on 9/11, as they did from Boston to Orlando to San Bernardino and all across Europe. That's what Trump said at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa yesterday. All over Europe it's happening. It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. In many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it. Now, the New York Times says that the theory that the media is trying to whitewash terrorist attacks originates with Alex Jones over at InfoWars. And this is a very troubling issue because I'm not, as you know, a big fan of our intelligence community. But if Donald Trump is getting his news from Fox and Alex Jones and from weird sources that Steve Bannon has, well, we're not all on the same page. And the fear-mongering and the fearful behavior that Donald Trump displays, when you look at the facts and what the real threats are and the threats that he gins up, there's a huge gap. And this is what the federal judges have to deal with in the hearing today. Is this man hinged or unhinged? And Trump keeps offering this inane standard, if you can even call it that, for who should be allowed to enter our country. He said, we need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in, and not people that want to destroy us and destroy our country. Now, are we just going to let people who have a tattoo, I Heart America, will assume that if they made that permanent ink on their body, that they must be really sincere? And is the absence of a declaration of love for the United States a reason to fear that somebody is a terrorist? I mean, that is just so bizarre. And it's based on Trump's own weird mentality that everything is about whether he likes you and you like him. It is just so weird. So the media took a couple of hours, used online search engines, and came up with all of the details on all of the coverage of all of the attacks that Trump says were not properly covered. And Sean Spicer tries to modify the president's claim by saying, well, he said they were undercovered. No, he did not. And David Gergen, who's a, Beltway insider, guy who's been around, was on the payroll of 4 different presidents. He says, I think this is one of the most outrageous claims the president has made among many, because it really says basically that the press isn't doing its job because it has its own political agenda. It doesn't want you to know the truth about how dangerous terrorism is. It doesn't want to be out there. It's just pulling a leftist agenda on you, which is clearly not true. He engages in these falsehoods without producing any serious evidence. The list includes San Bernardino, as if the press didn't cover that sufficiently. It's just astonishing, and it's beneath the dignity of the presidency, and I think it tears at the fabric of what holds us together as a people. When we can't trust each other, we can't trust the White House, and he's telling us we can't trust the press. This is the way democracies become unraveled. Every day I pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Carl Howard in Columbus, Ohio, Susan Gavay right here in Marin County, Tim McKay, and Jim Garrison. I appreciate your support, and I hope you set an example for others to support me as well. If you'd like to, come on over to peterbcollins.com, click the menu button, and pull it down. Click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page where you've got options, and I hope you'll be as generous as you can. Thanks for your support. Today I'm releasing a new in-depth interview, and it is in-depth. Trevor Aronson returns to our podcast today. He's the journalist who wrote Terror Factory 4 years ago, exposing the way the FBI uses paid informants to set people up for so-called domestic terrorism cases. And at The Intercept, where Aronson now works, they got a hold of confidential FBI documents, including the manual on how to manage these informants. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Trevor Aronson.
And so I think, it's really naive to think that the FBI is the benign law enforcement agency that should not be subject to criticism because it's the agency of good guys. I mean, I think, a lot of work needs to be done in keeping their power in check because their power is so extraordinary and their power is so intrusive, and really their powers have the ability to affect everyday Americans. And I think that's the thing I would hope people take away from this series is that, you might think that you're okay, that you haven't committed crimes, that, you're not doing anything illegal. And so
I got
why
nothing
would the
to
FBI
hide.
If you have nothing to hide, right? If you have nothing to hide, why would the FBI investigate you? And I think a lot of Americans just assume that they can't investigate you, but they can. They have every legal ability to investigate you, even when they have no reason whatsoever to suspect you're involved in criminal activity. And I think that's a really startling thing, and I think that's what I hope more Americans will begin to realize.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Trevor Aronson. It's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, all of the outlets where you find our podcast. I also encourage you, when you find the time, the lengthy reports at The Intercept are very much worth reading. There are 9 different installments that expose the FBI on Stingray, on paid informants, and the way many of these issues are controlled and manipulated, and that the FBI operates beyond a lot of oversight and proper regulation. That's all in our interview with Trevor Aronson today. He also commented briefly on this breaking story that an FBI agent who posed as a journalist and filmed interviews with Cliven Bundy and his family and supporters at the standoff a couple of years ago at the Bundy Ranch in Bunkerville, Nevada, well, this may compromise the government's case. The attorneys for Cliven Bundy and other defendants allege that the FBI created a bogus film company called Longbow Productions and tricked many of the defendants into making boastful, false, and potentially incriminating statements. So that's a form of entrapment that was aimed at white gun-toting Westerners. And it shows that the FBI is not only targeting Muslims with its illegal behavior. Yesterday and recently, I've made several comments about Donald Trump and his incoherent efforts to kind of take on the deep state. And with his tangling by denying the intelligence community assessments regarding Russia's involvement in our election, and in other ways, Trump has signaled that he's willing to, in some ways, take on the deep state. Well, I want to thank the folks at whowhatwhy.com, Russ Baker and his staff, because they've just published a two-part series of posts from the esteemed professor from UC Berkeley, emeritus, Peter Dale Scott. And these are excerpts from the paperback version of his book, The American Deep State, Big Money, Big Oil, and the Struggle for U.S. Democracy, which is coming out in short order. And it's Peter Dale Scott who coined the term deep state. He said, back in 2007, I first referred to a deep state in America, and the term has become a meme, even the topic of a cautious essay in the New York Times. He says those who saw the election as a contest between outsider Trump and a deep state tended to give two different meanings to this term. On the one hand were those who saw the deep state as a conglomerate of insiders, incorporating all those outside and inside the traditional state who run the country no matter who is in the White House and without the consent of voters. On the other were those like Chris Hedges, limited the deep state to those perverting constitutional American politics from the margin of the Washington Beltway, the security and surveillance apparatus, the war machine, etc. Well, I'm encouraging you to read both installments. It's fairly lengthy and very thoughtful. And Peter Dale Scott makes the case that the deep state is, deeply aligned with the wealthy, moneyed interests, the so-called 1%, and the corporate interests that run America. And I think it's a powerful and persuasive argument. Naomi Klein has an op-ed in today's New York Times really slamming labor leaders who are getting cozy with Trump. She writes, Sean McGarvey, president of North America's Building Trades Union, reported that Trump took him on a tour of the Oval Office and displayed a level of respect nothing short of incredible. And McGarvey, in turn, pledged to work hand in glove with the new administration on energy, trade, and infrastructure. He said, the president's a builder. Actually, this quote is from Terry O'Sullivan from the Laborers Union. The president's a builder, we're builders. But Naomi Klein points out that the edifice that Trump is building is rigged to collapse on the very people these unions are supposed to defend. And she eloquently outlines the disconnect, that labor leaders are so short-sighted that they're willing to compromise themselves to get a few jobs today at the risk of the long picture. And we know that there are more jobs now in the solar industry than there are in the oil pipeline industry. But that appears to be lost on some of our labor leaders. And I'm a staunch union member and supporter, but I'm not afraid to call out union bosses when they're wrong. David Sirota has said no thank you to David Brock. Well, you may have heard a couple of weeks ago I announced that Sirota had announced that he was joining True Blue Media to run a deep investigative news service that would be focused on the Trump administration. Well, Sirota issued a statement saying, I was thrilled to initially accept the proposal to work with True Blue Media because I believe in nonpartisan accountability journalism. However, the circumstances of the job subsequently changed. True Blue Media does not right now have in hand the resources for the kind of independent, nonpartisan journalism I want to continue to do and that's needed to execute on the ambitious editorial strategy that we agreed on. Therefore, I have decided to turn down the job. All right, that puts that to rest. Webster Tarpley is a Beltway blogger. Last August, he reported that Melania Trump had spent some time working as a high-paid escort, a sex worker. That led to a $150 million defamation lawsuit. The primary defendant was the owner of Britain's Daily Mail newspaper, Mail Media, and the judge dismissed them as a defendant, leaving Webster Tarpley standing there pretty naked. And we have a mutual friend who told me that Tarpley has been very worried about this. Now, there has been a settlement of the case, and Webster Tarpley has agreed to pay a substantial sum. I don't know how much that is and if it's going to bankrupt Mr. Tarpley, but I'm sorry to see the heavy-handed move of Donald Trump to use his money and power and lawyers to squelch an issue that deserves further scrutiny, at least in my humble opinion. And finally today, is it fake news? The report that the Fukushima nuclear reactor has melted down and is about to fall into the Pacific Ocean. I've seen reports of this over the last couple of days, but not in the corporate media. So I did an online search, and one of the early results was from Snopes, the group that debunks false reporting. And Snopes writes, on the 3rd of February, the disreputable website Your Newswire posted a story with the alarming but false claim that one of the reactors damaged in the 2011 disaster at Fukushima was on the verge of falling into the ocean. Well, Snopes looked into it, and their report is, no credible news reports have stated that a reactor is about to fall into the ocean, nor has any Japanese government agency announced a state of emergency. Your Newswire's exaggerated news seems to have been derived from media reports in early February about high levels of radiation found inside the containment vessel for reactor number 2. But that is the extent of the news that we have from Fukushima, and I'll continue to monitor this and see if we can separate fact from fake news. Thanks for listening to my News and Comment podcast. This daily outing is available on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to